The holidays are here, and so is the IKEA winter sale. Now's your chance to make the holidays a little more magical and less expensive. Save up to 50% off on select items in-store and online now through January 7th. Plus, IKEA loyalty members get an extra 10% off on sale items. And if you spend $2.99 or more on a single order before December 10th, enjoy free delivery. Offer valid in the U.S. through 1/7 while supplies last. Selection may vary by store and online. See store and IKEA-USA.com/winter sale for complete terms. Restrictions apply.
State Farm and DJ Dramos from Life as a Gringo know making smarter financial moves today secures your financial freedom for a successful tomorrow.
In my family, one of the biggest points of contention was finances. And I know as I gotten older, I made it a promise to myself to say, I don't want to relive that. Hiring somebody to do credit repair for me. That was a gift that I gave myself that allowed me to then get my first apartment, then eventually buy my own home. Like, these are all things that are possible.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. State Farm, proud sponsor of My Cultura Podcast Network.
When Eric Nelams was gunned down in 2003, the police knew this was a targeted attack. With 2 solid leads early on, it was hard to imagine his family would still be waiting for answers over 20 years later. But someone out there knows something, and one more tip could be all they need to find justice. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello, and welcome to Crimelines. Today's episode is going to get into the cold case murder of Eric Nelams out of Alabama, and I have 2 thank yous at the top. The first is to Eric's sister, Kathy, who took the time to give me a lot of information and to go over my script. And the second thank you is to Dawn with the Method and Madness podcast. She covered this case, and her incredible research was a source for this episode. Let's go ahead and get started with Eric, who was born in June of 1971 and grew up to be a very charming and loving person. His sister Kathy told me that he would do just about anything for his family, even from a young age. And when he became an uncle, he dove right into his role. And I don't just mean the fun uncle who would run around and play with the kids. He was more hands-on with them than some parents are with their own children. When Kathy was working second shift after her daughter was born, Eric would get up in the middle of the night to feed and change the baby, even rocking her back to sleep. Spending those sleepless nights together led to Eric having a really deep bond with his niece, and that bond continued when Kathy had her son. So all of that to say that unlike most 23-year-olds, Eric had a lot of practice when his own son Antonio was born. He was very hands-on and close with his son, even though after he split with his son's mother, they ended up living several hours apart. He would drive to see Antonio and pick him up regularly, regardless of the distance. Eric served in the Army during the Persian Gulf War and studied computer science. In 2003, Eric was settled down in Phoenix City, Alabama, and he worked for Kodak Polychrome, which is located in Columbus, Georgia, which is right over the state line. Kodak Polychrome is a company that produces pre-printing supplies, so things like printing plates, film, the chemicals needed for doing all of that sort of thing. I don't tell you this because it's relevant to the case in any way at all. I'm telling you this because I think if you listen to enough Crimelines episodes and you listen to my tangentially related information, you might one day win Jeopardy. But back to the relevant information in this case. In 2003, Eric married his longtime girlfriend, Molly. If you look up this case, you may see her name reported differently. This is the name she uses when she takes out memorial ads for Eric, so I assume this is the name she would want me to use. Full disclosure, I did not talk to her for this episode. Eric and Molly had known each other since high school, and they dated off and on for pretty much a decade. By the time they married, they had been together for a few years, And Molly had 2 children, both of whom Eric knew since they were born, but they were not biologically his children. But Kathy told me Eric used to say they were supposed to be his kids. And just like we saw how he jumped in with Kathy's kids and how he jumped in with his own son, he did the same thing here with Molly's children, and using the term stepfather feels entirely inappropriate given the fathering role he took on. Molly and Eric's relationship hit a rocky patch just months after their wedding, and the two were in the process of separating at the time of Eric's death. In fact, Kathy was under the impression that Molly had already moved out of the house, though we do know she was in the home on the morning of the murder. With some couples, you could probably interpret this as a sign that they were reconciling, but with Eric, he was the type of guy who would let his ex stay with him if she needed a place to be, so I don't think we can read into this as a reconciliation in this situation. It could have been, but we don't know. So that brings us to the morning of the murder, Friday, September 26th, 2003. Eric got up early to go to work. His shift started at 6 a.m., and even though Phoenix City and Columbus border each other, Eric lived on one side of Phoenix City, and the Kodak company was clear on the other side of Columbus. So this was still a good 25-minute drive. So Eric did his usual morning routine and headed out to his car around 5:30. His wife, Molly, and the 2 kids were inside when she said she heard gunshots. Molly said she was very scared, so she and the kids left the house through a window and hid in the woods behind their neighborhood until she felt it was safe enough to come out. She then went to a neighbor's house and had them call 911. I think it's interesting to note that Molly left the house to hide. She had to have thought that whoever was shooting might come inside the house, and that she and her children would be safer if they left. So, was she thinking this was a possible home invasion, or was she worried that the person firing the shots was actually going to target her? We'll get into this a little bit more later. It seems like Molly and the kids were hiding for several minutes based on the timeline. It was estimated that Eric was shot at about 5:30, and then the 911 call came in closer to 5:40. The police arrived to the scene pretty quickly, and there they found 32-year-old Eric Nelams shot to death in his own driveway. Because of the early hour that this happened, there was only one witness. She said she saw multiple people run from the crime scene and they got into a car. Any other information she had, the police have held back, though they have said that this witness could only give a basic description of the people she saw. So she didn't get specifics on their facial features and only had general appearance information to provide. Where Eric lived was solidly residential, and the street into his neighborhood wasn't even a through street. There was only one way in and one way out. That is to say, there is no one back in that neighborhood at 5:30 in the morning unless they mean to be there. That rules out a crime of opportunity. The police have also largely ruled out robbery as a motive, as the men didn't try to take anything. Eric was leaving for work, so we have to imagine he had his wallet with him, and he definitely had his car keys. With multiple people at the scene, if robbery was the motive, it would not have been hard for one of them to hop in his car and take off. But they didn't. Based on the evidence we have, it seems that these men were in the neighborhood for no other reason than to shoot Eric Nelams. And it seemed it would have to be someone who knew his habits and knew that the best time to get him when his guard was down and there would be few, if any, witnesses was when he left for work early in the morning. Eric's family learned about the shooting in a roundabout way. Before the police notified them, or even Eric's wife, someone called Eric's aunt, so his mother Annie's sister, and told her that Eric had been shot at his house. So then she had the awful task of calling Annie to let her know what she had just heard, and Annie almost didn't believe it, because why weren't the police the ones who called her, or Eric's wife? But Annie, of course, immediately headed towards Eric's house to see what was going on, and that's when she found the police still at the scene. And also at the scene was Eric's body. Annie wanted to go hold him, at least touch him, which they wouldn't let her do. This was an active crime scene, but a grieving heart doesn't know that. She was very upset as she was only allowed to watch from a distance while her son was lying out on the driveway. This was then made worse when no one from law enforcement reached out to the family. Having talked to a lot of families in situations like this, I can tell you that a 10-minute sit-down early on with the investigators can mean the world to families when they are stuck in a spiral of grief and confusion. Even an assurance that the detectives were chasing down leads can help. Otherwise, they are left in the dark, feeling even more powerless in a situation where they have already lost a sense of security and control. Talking to families really needs to be a priority in investigations. I mean, this is respecting their humanity and it's important. But it's also important for another reason. In this case, Eric's sister Kathy had information she could have given them on day one, but she had to go to them to provide it. It was something that Eric told Kathy on the Monday before he was killed. He was killed on a Friday, so we're talking just 4 days before his death. Eric told Kathy that he was mixed up in something. His friend's wife had been embezzling from her work, and Eric had gotten wrapped up as a bit of a middleman in the scheme. The immediate issue was that the company had caught on to this, and Eric didn't know what was going to happen next. He was meeting up with the friend and the wife to try to figure it out. And this information Kathy gave the police was spot on. The company was in the early stages of investigating this embezzlement, and it would eventually be legally adjudicated, so it is a matter of public record, and therefore it is fully cleared for public release. I paid my money to the man, aka Pacer, which is where you can pull federal court records, for the low price of 10 cents a page, and this is how I got caught up on what happened. This all started when one of Eric's friends, whose name was also Eric Cowling, and his wife Stephanie approached Eric with an idea of how they could make some money. The Cowlings appear to have chronic issues with money, or at least they did back then. They filed for bankruptcy in 1995, the embezzlement started in 2001, and then they filed for bankruptcy again in 2004 after the embezzlement stopped. So to get into some of the details, we'd be here all day if I got into all of them. Stephanie worked for XL Logistics, which is a supply chain management company that helped people move products throughout the country and the world. And this isn't just Jeopardy trivia, this is actually relevant. Stephanie was working as a line haul manager, which meant she would be involved in finding and managing third-party trucking companies to move these things along in the supply chain. A key role of her job, the key role as far as this case is concerned, was to approve invoices from these transport service companies. In April of 2001, Stephanie first entered a vendor named Eric Nelams into the system and approved it as a third-party carrier. So this is Eric's name with a single letter changed. I assume it's changed to make it sound more like the name of a company, because between Erie, Pennsylvania and Lake Erie, this is a pretty well-known place name within the United States. The mailing address for the vendor was a post office box in Phoenix City that, according to court documents, Eric set up.
The following ad is sponsored by Pets Best Insurance Services. Your pet is your bestie. Your therapist, your preferred match. It's easy to love them, even when they sneak your snacks. It's easy to protect them, too, with pet insurance coverage from Pets Best. Because it's all fun and games until they chew on something they shouldn't. With perfect timing, Pets Best helps protect your furry friend and your budget from this imperfect world. Get up to 90% on eligible vet bills for less than $1 a day. Find your perfect match at PetsBest.com. Pet insurance products offered and administered by Pets Best Insurance Services, LLC, are underwritten by American Pet Insurance Company or Independence American Insurance Company. For all terms, visit PetsBest.com/policy.
It's the Knix Best of 2024 sale, going on now at Knix.com. Don't miss incredible deals on life-changing leak-proof underwear, unbelievable everyday bras, and more from the #1 leak-proof brand in North America. Save big, like 30% off bras, 40% off leak-proof, 50% off tops and bottoms, 60% off swim at Knix.com. That's KNIX.com. Millions of women have made the switch to Knix's revolutionary period underwear, and there's never been a better time for you to try them. During the Best of 2024 sale, save up to 40% on super comfy, machine-washable, and stylish leak-proof undies. Plus, shop other year-end clearance deals like 30% off bras, 50% off tops and bottoms, 60% off swim, and more. Stock up on your Knix favorites or try something new during the Knix Best of 2024 sale. But hurry, these deals are only good while supplies last. That's KNIX.com. Hurry, the sale ends soon and sizes will sell out. Go to Knix.com. That's KNIX.com. Time is a luxury for us, especially if you're a mom. That's why we need a skincare routine that's easy, fast, and gives us results. Plus, what if your products had thousands of 5-star reviews, were natural and affordable? Well, say hello to Dime Beauty. Dime Beauty is clean, high-end skincare that is affordable, and it really works. Not sure where to start? I highly recommend the Work System. It's everything you need in one powerful package. Take out the guesswork with a proven routine that includes a gentle yet effective cleanser, a super skin toner, 2 incredible serums, and 2 luxurious moisturizers. See what everyone is raving about. From serum sets to the always sold-out retinol alternative TBT cream, you'll find your perfect skincare match. Dime has over 2 million happy customers, and their product reviews are literally 5 stars. Love your skin again. Go to DimeBeautyCO.com for 20% off with code GETDIME. That's DimeBeautyCO.com, code GETDIME for 20% off.
Eric's family does not shy away from the fact that his friend, Eric Cowling, talked him into helping them with the scheme and that Eric was wrong in participating. They know that we have to be transparent about this part of things to understand what the stakes were in this case and why this is an angle the police need to pursue. From April of 2001 until May of 2002, Stephanie paid out 54 fake invoices to the tune of over $193,000. The fraud stopped after 13 months because Stephanie was fired due to performance-related issues. The company had not yet uncovered the embezzlement. So then Stephanie got more or less the same job with DHL in June of 2002. And her duties, responsibilities, and ability to approve third-party transportation companies was the same. For months, nothing happened. But then in November of 2002, Stephanie approved Eric Nelams as a vendor for DHL using that same post office box. From December of 2002 until September of 2003, Stephanie sent nearly $260,000 in checks to Eric's P.O. box. And like with the first job, Eric would deposit the checks into his account and then send the money to Stephanie. Of course, Eric was keeping a cut of the money for his troubles, but it's not exactly clear how much it was. It was definitely less than the Cowlings were getting based on the disparities in their lifestyles. Eric had a nice but modest home in an affordable suburb of Columbus, Georgia. He was still going to work at 5:30 every morning. His bank accounts had the deposits from the companies, but he never carried this excessive balance for long. The Cowlings, on the other hand, were enjoying a very nice lifestyle, including a big fancy house and everything else you could afford if you had an extra $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month coming in. It was September 11th, 2003 that Eric deposited the last check from DHL, which was written out to about $26,000. This was 15 days before the murder. Right around the same time, DHL realized what was happening during an internal audit that they were running, and the reason they caught on was because the invoices were showing up as duplicate payments. Any payment going out had to match an actual service that was carried out in DHL's system. But the computer would flag a duplicate payment, so Stephanie started taking an actual job that was done, copying all the information, including file reference numbers, the weight of the shipment, and the dates, and then she would create a manual invoice and approve the payment that way. This kept these duplicate payments from getting flagged immediately in the system. But if a human sat down with their human eyes and looked at the books, they would very quickly see it. And during this audit, they saw it. And then they noticed that every one of the duplicate payments was paid to the same company, Eric Nelams. So the internal auditor tried to find out more about this company. No one had heard of it except for Stephanie, who said she was aware of the vendor, but she'd have to look into the details in her records before she answered any specific questions. And then she abruptly left the company. By September 22nd, which is the day Eric talked to Kathy about what was going on, Stephanie knew they were going to figure it out, and she was not showing up to work. The next day, Tuesday, September 23rd, Eric did meet with Stephanie and his friend Eric in Atlanta. And while there, Stephanie gave Eric 2 items. One was a freight bill to the tune of $2,900. It was presumably given to Eric so that he had paperwork to prove that he did do work for DHL. The other thing Stephanie gave Eric in her own writing was basically a cheat sheet so he could familiarize himself with billing and trucking language and general information that a vendor would know. Things like the names of various DHL employees and their job descriptions. The idea was that these 2 things would help Eric when the investigator came calling. It seems Stephanie was still hoping that somehow they were going to get away with this. Reportedly, at this meeting, which it sounds like Eric's wife was at, Stephanie also tried to pressure Eric into taking the fall for the scheme, but he didn't want to do that. And then, 3 days after this meeting, Eric was gunned down outside of his home. While Eric's mother, Annie, was at the scene that day, she said she saw Eric Cowling along with other, quote, persons of interest at Eric's house. We don't have Eric's side of the story here because he was killed before he could give it. But we know how white-collar crimes go. With Eric being the lesser-involved conspirator in the embezzlement, he would be the person who would be offered a deal in exchange for information against his friends. But with Eric dead, he wouldn't be able to confirm or deny any of it. As for what happened in this embezzlement case, after DHL uncovered what happened at their company, they did notify Stephanie's former employer and told them about it. Now that they had the name of the fake vendor from DHL, they were able to find the fraud in their system, and all of this was turned over to the authorities. Stephanie was arrested and charged with theft by deception, initially with state charges, but it eventually was transferred to federal court, where both Stephanie and her husband Eric were indicted in May of 2006 on wire and mail fraud charges. What made this a federal case was that this money kept crossing state lines. The checks would be issued in one state, mailed to the Alabama P.O. box, but then the bank that Eric would deposit the checks at was across the state line in Georgia. So this money was crossing state lines repeatedly. Both Stephanie and her husband Eric pleaded out in September of 2006 to multiple counts, and they were sentenced in January of 2007. Eric Howling got 36 months in prison and 3 years of supervised release, plus he was ordered to pay restitution. Stephanie was sentenced to 42 months and had similar release orders. According to what the family has been told, Stephanie and Eric have been questioned about Eric Nelams' murder, but if any links were made, they have not been made public. The family and I want to make it clear that we are not accusing anyone of anything. It's just that when you're looking at motives, you have to look at the people who have them. And so that brings me to the second person that Kathy told me about. Eric didn't go around making enemies. People liked him, but sometimes we end up in the lives of people who have people who might not like us. And in this case, this was his wife, Molly. They had that years-long on-again, off-again relationship, and in those off times, the two of them would see other people. And Molly had an ex who had recently, in relation to Eric's murder, gotten out of prison for a violent crime. And reportedly, he was not happy that she had remarried. So this goes back to what I said about Molly being afraid that the shooter was coming after her next. So much so that she and her children climbed out of a window and hid in the woods. If Molly suspected this may be her ex, whether it was or not, just the fear that it was would have been enough to make her feel like sheltering in place was not safe and that he was coming after her next. That's about all that's been released on this particular lead, but we did have these two leads pretty early on, and the police have said that they are exploring the possibility that this was a murder for hire. So the people seen by the witness getting into that car may not be the people who actually have the motive. In the years since Eric's murder, his sister Kathy has taken on advocating for her brother's case. She uses social media to connect with cold case advocates, and that led her to podcasters who have been reporting on the story. Seasons of Justice has funded a billboard, and there is a $10,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator. As for what you, the listener, can do right now, other than come forward if you know anything, what my average listener can do is sign a petition. Kathy is hoping to get the Alabama Attorney General to investigate the case. Phoenix City is a town of 38,000 people, 28,000 when Eric was killed, so not a small town, but it's not a big city either. Maybe resources from the state are what's going to solve this case. The Phoenix City Police Department did give the Method and Madness podcast a statement saying that the case is still active and that they continue to follow up on the leads. They look into anything they can, particularly with the advancements in forensic science, which is great and all, but they've had the case for 20 years. At this point, what could it hurt to allow an outside agency to come in with more resources and take another look at it? With it being believed there were multiple people involved at the scene, it's hard for me to believe that not one of them has talked. Not one of them had to get it off his chest. Maybe with some dedicated investigation, we can find out who that someone was. And as we know so often in cases where it is a murder for hire, once the gunman knows they're going down, they're not going down alone and they roll over on the person who orchestrated it. but it's going to take a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of interviews, and a lot of follow-up to find the weakest link in this conspiracy. To get the Attorney General's office and the Phoenix City Police to prioritize this case, there needs to be public pressure, and the way we get public pressure is through the media. I mean, it's what Sarah Turney was told outright when she went to the police about her missing sister, Alyssa Turney's case going cold. They told her what she needed to do was get media on it, and that is exactly what Kathy is trying to do here. I will leave Kathy's Change.org petition in the show notes, which is asking the Attorney General to get involved. Those signatures let the investigators know that the public has an interest in getting justice in this case, and it really is the least we can do after we consume true crime content. Signing a Change.org petition is such an easy call to action, and I encourage all of you to click that link. Otherwise, if you know anything about the murder of Eric Nelams, all tips need to go to the Alabama Crimestoppers at 334-215-STOP. I'm telling you, there were multiple people at the scene, and you cannot convince me that not one of them had too many drinks and confessed to somebody, or had a moment of being overwhelmed with guilt and spilled the beans. If you are the person who heard that information, again, the number is 334-215-STOP, and along with the Change.org petition, I'll leave it in the show notes.
"50 years ago, a young woman named Karen Silkwood got into her car alone.
She was reportedly on her way to deliver sensitive documents to a New York Times reporter.
She never made it, and those documents she'd agreed to carry were never found."
Do you think somebody killed her?
There's no question in my mind that someone killed her that night. I think they were trying to stop her in order to get the documents.
A new investigation into the life and death of America's first nuclear whistleblower.
Listen to Radioactive, the Karen Silkwood Mystery from ABC Audio. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.